panel said, this is the post-lunch session, and therefore it is natural to be relaxed. But I'm sure that this session is going to keep you on your toes, and at least we'll try and make it exciting for you. Is everyone okay with English, or do you want me to speak in Hindi or mixed? Anything is okay? All right. So as I said, I head the BJP's digital initiatives, and as part of my role, I ensure that the party's ideologies, the government's program, and our several achievements reach the people in the form and through the idioms that they today most relate to. Part of my responsibility also is countering a lot of negative and hate propaganda that goes around, either against the party or the ideology that I represent. And when I say this, I know I've said the cat amongst the pigeons, but that's exactly what the reality of any narrative or any counter narrative is. For a very long time in our country, there was a near uniformity of narrative, at least in the public domain. And that was so because the media was largely controlled by those who were leaning on the left. The other public narrative was controlled by those in public institutions that were tax funded. And because they were funded from public money, they invariably toed the line of the government of the day, which, as we all know, for a very long time was again leaning towards the left. But a lot of that changed over the last about 7 to 8 years with the advent of social media. If people thought that internet was the most disruptive thing that happened, they probably did not realize the impact of what a social media could bring about. It was far more disruptive than what the internet promised to be. What it led to was a democratization of discourse, which meant that there was no more one view, which was also the national narrative. The ability to form narratives moved away from those who occupied high offices in print media, in electronic media, or in tax-funded institutions. It moved away into the hands of the common people. And each one of us, you and I sitting in this room, got a voice. What we said was as important and as relevant as what an editor of a newspaper wrote. No more we were sending our dissent by way of letters and by way of emails, which perhaps were not even read and consigned to the dustbins of editorial offices of these newspapers. The feedback was far more direct, was far more in the face. The hypocrisy was called out then and there, and that essentially changed the way how narrative in this country on various issues started shaping up. And if I can give you small examples of how the traditional media narrative reports issues and how they actually play out in the field, you would be stunned. Just before we got onto this panel, I was speaking to my fellow panelist here, and she told me that she was part of a project at Hindustan Times where she put up that hate tracker. Now, while I understand that was something that they perhaps believed in for whatever reason, the biasness of that hate tracker was so obvious that it only picked on violence that happened against those who came from the minority community. It conveniently ignored all instances of violence against those who came from majority community. And I can't understand how any newspaper or any news channel can distinguish between people who've been at the receiving end of violence or of any kind of bias and look at that victim purely through the prism of his religion. And that is what mainstream media and those who have made a career out of serving in tax-funded institutions did for 70 years in this country. All of that has changed because of social media. Today, an Ankit Saxena who's skilled on the streets of Delhi is as important as an individual from any other community. But the outrage in the mainstream media is disproportionate. That has changed. Some of you are obviously very young in this room, and you may not remember that in 1998 and 2004, during that period, when a BJP-led government was at the center under the leadership of Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the narrative that we see today was exactly how it played out then. This thing about minorities are under threat was played out even under Mr. Vajpayee. The difference, however, was that there was no social media to bust that negative campaign. And today, such campaigns don't hold. And that is really what social media has done. And it has happened because of people like yourselves who are not occupying editorial positions in newspapers, but people who are vigilant, who are seeing what's happening in the society. They write about it, you comment about it. You are not prisoners of reputations of editors or anchors of newspapers and news channels. You can question any journalist, or for that matter, any politician, on the claims that he or she makes. And that is essentially what the social media has changed. I'm also quite appalled at the use of this term troll. This was invented to suit the convenience of those who were getting questioned, those who believed that it was their ordained right to decide what is right for India. The newspaper that my fellow panelists worked with in the past had an editor who believed that whatever his pen wrote was the final word on issues, till it came out that he was taking dictations from a corporate lobbyist to write his op-ed columns. There are anchors in the media space who claim to know everything about what was happening in the government because they were playing go-between between government and their allies in government formation. Electing ministers was not the prerogative of the Prime Minister under the Congress and other left-leaning governments, but it was the journalists who were deciding who would get which ministerial berth. Social media has exposed a lot of this hypocrisy. And those who exposed it were called trolls. But the larger question remains that what kind of conduct should we have on social media? While there are a lot of positives to it and there is a lot of democratization of discourse, we also must realize that there is an element of abuse and there is an element of verbal violence that goes on in social media. And this question often gets asked that whether we want the medium to be like this. And my answer to this has been very categorical, and my answer to this has been very consistent, and so has been my party's position, that our view and our conduct on social media should be exactly the way it would be in personal life. So I may disagree with you on issues, but I am unlikely to call you names or abuse you, or even intimidate you with violence and words. And that's exactly how our conduct on social media should be. And to conclude my opening remarks, what looks like the future of social media? Where do you think this medium is going to take us as a society? I think social media has made us a very expressive and in some ways an extrovert society. Today a lot of people are voicing their opinions, a lot of people are expressing themselves. So when you go out for a coffee with your friends and you put a picture on Instagram, you probably would not have done it, or my generation would not have ever done it. And that's perhaps the reason why I feel a little restrained about doing it now when I go out with my family. But the generation that you represent, you're absolutely cool to do it. And you have opinions on issues. You can express those opinions. And some of the most powerful voices are people who are not regular columnists or journalists. They're people like you and me who have a view on what's happening in the society. And you speak about it. And you get heard because you're making a powerful argument. And therefore, I believe that the future of social media really depends on our ability to cut out the noise and pick the relevant information and put it out for people to consume. Today, amateur historians who are probably software engineers and they are coding to earn their bread and butter are avid travel bloggers and avid historians, because their appreciation of history and their ability to research has earned them great followership and readership. And therefore, you don't need to be a Romila Thapar today to be known as a great historian. You could be somebody who could get invited to speak on issues purely because of the research that you've done and you've put it out there. I know of several such people who have not been trained as historians, who have not made careers as historians, but their account of historical events has been absolutely, absolutely brilliant. It has put to shame some of the professional historians, and that's been possible because of social media and because of the fact that the information or the work that they do can today be read by millions and millions of people. All that it needs is sincerity, all that it needs is a purpose, and you have the tools and the medium today to get yourself heard. Thank you so much. I'll just pause with those opening comments.